What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, September 25th, 2017, start of a brand new week of insanity. It just seems that as time goes on, things are just getting a little bit wacko out there. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We always do coming in from the weekend here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, supposedly, according to some stories I saw in the corporate media, last Saturday was the rapture. So if you're hearing this broadcast, you didn't make it. Just something to sort of keep a perspective on what's going on around here. Actually, I understand that at the last second, this David Meade, this prophet, said rapture's been postponed, which is a real shame because I was looking forward to all those free houses and cars and everything. Getting on to the war zones, obviously Korea is a huge mess. Everybody's thumping their chest. Nobody's actually doing anything, which is a good thing here. Article out of Political Wire asking, is Trump all talk on North Korea? Because nothing is really being done yet, thankfully. And is he just playing to his own supporters, trying to be the war president they all want him to be, even though we, the American people, want exactly the opposite? And the reality is everything that he's doing is largely symbolic. Now, as you know, he came out with a new version of the travel ban, banning travel from specific countries. No, it's not based on religion, it's specific countries. And this time, North Korea was added to the list. Oh, horror of horrors, there's a travel ban against North Korea. Not really. Hardly anybody from North Korea comes to the United States. There's really not much point in banning them other than it's another way for Donald Trump to hurl an insult at Kim Jong-un and North Korea. It's not really going to have any kind of an effect on anything. Now, as you know, the foreign minister of North Korea came on out earlier today and said that as far as North Korea is concerned, the United States is declaring war on North Korea. With all this talk about annihilating the entire country and all the rest of that. And so apparently White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, this is absurd. We have not declared war on North Korea. That's absurd, you know. And I'm starting to wonder, did she not see Trump's United Nations speech? Because it certainly sounded belligerent and warlike to me, and this is where that authorization for the use of military force comes back to bite the U.S. government credibility. Because Congress hasn't declared war officially for a very, very long time. It's just whoever the president wants to go after, and it sounds like Trump wants to go after North Korea. So I think from the point of view of North Korea, yeah, it definitely sounded like Trump was declaring war on North Korea. But the official White House statement is that that's absurd. You know, North Korea is going to make the first move, even if we have to have a false flag to make it look that way. Meanwhile, after Iran's test firing a ballistic missile that supposedly can hold multiple warheads, which implies that they're getting ready for the end of the P5+1 deal, and Trump is out there saying that obviously Iran and North Korea, they're in cahoots together. They're helping each other out. How dare they do that? And he's also dragging in Russia and China, saying Russia and China are secretly helping North Korea with their missiles and their nuclear warheads. He's trying to create this image of an us, the good guys, versus all of these other countries he wants to invade, the bad guys, the axis of unpleasantness or whatever he's going to call them. So he's out there just casting this wide net, and again, no evidence to support any of this. It's just huge. Now, the North Korean foreign minister, when he was out there saying that it looks like the U.S. is trying to declare war on North Korea, came on out and said that North Korea has a right to shoot down all these U.S. bombers that are flying along their coastline and coastal waters, even if they're not technically in their airspace. And your first reaction might be, well, no, you can't do that, international airspace and so forth and so on. But don't forget the U.S. government's heavy investment in what are called standoff-launched munitions. U.S. bombers don't have to be over someplace to bomb it. They can drop a guided bomb or a missile from way, way out and have it fly on in. That's how they did Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. The F-117s went on in with laser designators to pinpoint the targets, and heavy bombers flying outside of Iraq dropped these munitions that followed those laser beams in to hit their targets. Israel's playing the same game with Syria. They're attacking Syria from within Lebanon's airspace, which has prompted a complaint by Lebanon that Israel is not respecting their sovereignty. So North Korea does have a legitimate right to be concerned about all these practice bombing missions that the U.S. and South Korea and Japan are doing along their borders, because these countries can, in fact, inflict damage on North Korea from outside North Korea's borders with these standoff-launched munitions. Now, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is out there saying that they are now preparing to give Trump options if the provocations continue. And again, it seems to get a very strange definition of provocations. You don't see North Korean bombers flying along our borders. You don't see North Korean warships tooling around the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of California. So who is it who's really being provocative here? But they're out there basically saying that if North Korea does not stop these provocative actions, we will provide options to the president. Well, these options may be limited because, as we've mentioned before, there are limits to what U.S. weapons can do. And I'm not even talking about the latest weapons that are just overpriced junk like the F-22 and F-35. The reality is that our anti-ballistic missile doctrine is built around a model of defending the targets. And we have heard both Japan and the United States say repeatedly, if North Korea tests any more missiles, we'll shoot down the test missiles. Want to know why they haven't done it? They can't. They can't. That last test that North Korea shot over the island of Hokkaido was 475 miles altitude. It was out in space. THAAD can't reach it there. The standard missiles carried on the Aegis cruisers can't hit it there. They're all designed to operate inside the atmosphere. So in point of fact, they can't hit the missiles. And even more alarming stories coming out of Asia Times saying that North Korea's missiles could reach Chicago, and it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to stop them. The Hwasong-14 can even reach the East Coast, and U.S. anti-missile defenses probably couldn't shoot it down. Now, remember that whole strategic defense initiative that Reagan came up with? About how they borrowed and spent all this money for all these demonstrations about all these amazing space-based weapons that were going to prevent a nuclear attack. The reality is nothing usable came out of all that R&D. In fact, a lot of people are saying it was just a bluff to get the Russians to spend more money and bankrupt their country on military spending, which is what our government is now doing to the United States of America. So the reality is, I mean, look back at the first, actually the second Iraq War, not the first one where they went in through Kuwait and they stopped short of Baghdad, but the second one, where Iraq was firing these Scud missiles at Israel, and the Patriot batteries were not able to intercept them. We were told at the time 90% success rate. Well, if you shoot 10 nuclear weapons at somebody and one gets through, what's the point of that 90% success rate? As it turned out, the success rate was a lot lower, and in the event of the use of biological weapons, even if you hit that incoming missile, it's still going to come down on your territory. So it's not as clean as the propaganda would suggest to you. Now, over in Russia, Sergei Lavrov is saying at this point the U.S. will not attack North Korea because North Korea has reached that threshold. They have missiles that can reach the United States of America. They absolutely do have nuclear weapons. And the U.S. does not attack countries that have nuclear weapons. That's the whole point of a nuclear deterrent, to convince the United States or other imperialistic conquering powers to leave you the heck alone. Meanwhile, South Korea has launched their own military buildup. They want to match North Korea, and they're going to start building their own nuclear-powered submarines and launching their own spy satellites to counter the North Korea threat. And it's amazing to look at all of this and realize it was only 6 years ago when the Koreas were talking about reunification. And then the U.S. gets involved, and they're back to hating each other all over. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Why would they waste a warhead on Chicago or Detroit? They're already, looks like the bombs went off there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the idea is just that they can reach the United States, and we ought to be cognizant of that.
Hey, Mike, what's your take on that earthquake in North Korea, the 4.3?
Well, I think it was probably a botched test. I know that China says that they think it was some kind of an explosion, very weak compared to the last one. For some reason, South Korea is saying they think it was just a very, very shallow earthquake. And it's entirely possible that mountain where they've been testing North Korea's nuclear weapons is now very unstable. There may have been a massive landslide or a cave-in. Because remember, when you test a nuclear bomb underground, it creates this gigantic void. And if that were to collapse, you might get what looked like a shallow earthquake there. So we don't really know. If it was some kind of a warhead test, it fizzled. It didn't work.
Hey, Mike, I want to just ask your listeners, is North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Russia, China not allowing you to go to the store every day or go to work every day or live your lives every day? No, they're not. It's your own government that's taxing you to death, that outsources your jobs, that bails out the rich bankers on Wall Street and sends you the bill. So this whole thing about, this aggressive of these other countries, while your own government lies to you, the Clintons, the Bushes, the McCains, the Lindsey Grahams, the whole group, the liberal media, the sports stars, and the actors and actresses, not all of them, but most of them, these are the real threat. I just want, I want to explain this to people. This whole sports thing also, like with the not standing for the national, people got to realize the United States is it's a country with a flag. It's a piece of dirt with a flag. You can be good or bad. There's no such thing as a country that's good or bad. It's a blank, neutral country, and whoever occupies it, either it's citizenry, dumbed down or not, and the government. It's the government that's your country it basically makes your country good or bad. And I hate to say this, but this country is not the good guy no more.
No, we're not.
We haven't been the good guy. And I'm drawn with this flag flap. On one hand, it's disrespectful, but on the other hand, I understand because there's a lot of problems we got here. And there's certain people that like these problems. They wanted this, the divide and conquer strategy. We talked about that before. I just want people to think about this. It's like your government's done a lot of bad things, and unfortunately, they represent your country that you're living in.
Unfortunately, yeah, they do set the tone of the nation. It's very clear that the American people really have lost control of our own country. Last year's massive election fraud has pretty much proved it. We all know the government is lying to us to start all these wars. We know the corporate media lies about everything except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not all that good on the weather, especially with this confirmation bias to sell us human-caused global warming. But absolutely, ordinary people can get along just fine. It is governments that get us into these wars of conquest to make themselves rich, and we're not the good guys. We haven't been for quite some time. Of course, we're told we're the good guys coming out of the two previous world wars because we were on the winning side, and the winning side gets to write the history books. That's no longer true in the age of the Internet and the independent media. As far as all these athletes and actors and celebrities who are getting on board the war wagon, they just want to be in with the ins. and they're very willing to basically sell out their own private opinions on the war, just because they get invited to the big shows, and they get invited to halftime shows at the Super Bowl and the rest of it. And it really is a bunch of nonsense when these celebrities get on up there and lend their celebrity status to the war party just because they think it's going to help their career a little bit. And unfortunately, that is true. Anybody who doesn't go along with the government's agenda, their career gets destroyed. Look at what the FBI did to actress Jean Seberg back in the 1960s, destroyed her career and drove her to suicide because she was in favor of civil rights at a time when the Nixon White House really wanted to keep black-white relations stirred up and hostile.
Well, they don't care, though, Mike. They send the kids off to die in war, your husband, your wives, your kids. They come back crippled, dead. They go to the VA and they get treated like crap. They don't care, Mike.
No, they don't.
They just don't care. And, and Mike, we're headed, Mike, we're fracturing right now. It's getting worse out there. I mean, it's not getting any better. Every year it seems like it's just getting worse. And, with this flag flaps another, and then you're going to have the people coming out encouraging it. That's why this is not going to end, Mike. It's not going to end well. That's where we're headed, Mike.
I think this flag flap is just another attempt to find a way to divide Americans against each other, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show when we get into that when we get into that segment.
And I just want to say one more thing about the Russian Lieutenant General. Rest in peace. The one who got killed from the artillery attack.
We should say that to all of them. Everybody who's died. I mean, estimates are that the United States government has killed somewhere between 20 and 30 million people since the end of World War II.
Yep, we're not the good guy no more. I hate to tell people. There ain't no Batman, there ain't no Superman, there ain't no Wonder Woman coming out.
Nope.
That's it, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Apparently, the U.S.-led coalition had another airstrike near Raqqa that killed 84 civilians. Human Rights Watch is saying the U.S. isn't taking any precautions. They're just going for the targets they want to go at, and if there's civilians standing around, they're going to get killed. And this last one, they had 84 civilians, 30 children. And the U.S. is not taking any precautions to minimize civilian casualties. It's total war out there. Now, Sergei Lavrov is once again trying to remind everybody in the world that the U.S. bases in Syria are illegal. Now, Pompeo is out there trying to claim that the Russian presence in Syria is an attempt to stick it to the U.S. In reality, the Russian presence in Syria is because the Syrian government asked Russia for a partnership in the fight against jihadi terrorism, and Russia agreed to provide this assistance. The United States has not been invited into Syria by the Syrian government. The U.S. presence in Syria is illegal under international law. The United States does not have the permission either from Syria or from the United Nations to be there. It's just naked aggression. And at this point, it's almost like they're completely giving up the pretense that they're there to get the terrorists. Now, Israel's justice minister is out there saying if Putin wants to survive, he needs to keep his military forces out of Syria. And they're wagging their finger mightily at Russia. Now, again, Syria asked Russia to come to their country. Russia agreed. It is a negotiation between the two nation states that is really none of Israel's business. But Israel understands as long as Russia is assisting the government of Syria, then Syria is going to be back under the control of the Syrian government. It almost is totally now. It's only a matter of time before the rest of these terrorists, U.S.-backed jihadis, are swept out of there. Meanwhile, Russia has deployed an advanced model of a medium-range surface-to-air missile system in central Syria. It was stationed in Hama province. They're now relocating it, and they're sending a message to the U.S. Don't come in and try and bomb unilaterally. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, I have to say I share Dustin's same frustration, the arrogance of my nation, my country, my government, not the people. It doesn't represent the people, but the government. And when was the last time you ever heard any other country say collateral damage, justify the innocent death, this thing, oh, well, it was just collateral damage? We use that all the time, and that just burns me up, that's accepted. And I even hear people say, oh, well, that's what happens when you bring democracy. And I'm thinking, you're not bringing democracy. Nation building, this has nothing to do with democracy. You want to bring democracy or influence democracy in another nation, another country, you do it by treating your own people good and by example. You don't invade them.
It's a very, very good point.
So I get really irritated with the...
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. The fact of the matter is that virtually every U.S. intervention since the end of World War II has been sold to the American people under this idea that we're bringing these people democracy, but the result has never been democratic. It's always been totalitarian dictatorships with the pretense of democracy, like the Shah of Iran or the dictator Pinochet down in Chile. The United States isn't really interested in democracy either abroad or even in this country. Look at the massive election fraud. We're in the same situation. We're under a dictatorship that goes through this pageant, if you will, to make it look like we have elections. And except for the occasional upset like Donald Trump last year, for the most part, the elections are decided, again, as Stalin said, by those who are counting the ballots.
I agree. Hey, I'm in my last days of California life here, moving down to God's waiting room. So I am very happy I'm leaving the sanctuary state. But I do have one economic question for you. And Ron McDonald and I were talking one night about where does all the money go, the revenues, the registration, licensure, and all that stuff. Where does all the auto registration money, where does that go?
Well, in theory, it's to fund the Department of Motor Vehicles, and anything that's left over goes into the highway fund. But we know California has a bad habit of just spending the money wherever they feel they want to at the moment. I remember when California came in with the lottery, and it was sold to the voters in that it was going to mean more money for our schools. And when the lottery finally started up, the state of California basically cut the education budget by the expected amount of money that was coming in from the lottery. So the education system did not benefit from it one tiny bit, and California's government had more money to spend on things like, like illegal immigrants and other snowflake type stuff.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple kids show up at my door a couple days ago wanting me to buy a raffle ticket so they can buy equipment for school. And it burns me up because I'm saying, where's the fuel tax going? It's not going to the roads. It's not going to the schools. There is so much thievery going on out here in California, and it's all behind me now here pretty soon. Any day now, I'm out of here. But I feel bad for the good people who do have to stay here and live here because they're stealing us blind out here. They are thieving so much, looking for new taxation.
You want to know where? Yeah, well, you know where the money is going, of course, is to the bankers to pay the interest on all the money they borrowed recklessly in the past. That's why our nation is dying on the vine despite the high taxes. Most of it is just going to pay the interest on this out-of-control national and state debts.
Well, that's it for me, Mike. Next time I'll be talking to you, it'll be down in Florida.
All right, fabulous. I look forward to that. And we've got a couple more callers on the line, but we're coming up on a commercial break. So I'm going to put them off until we come on back here. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry has released aerial photos showing U.S. Special Ops at ISIS positions in Syria. They are working together, and Russia is now accusing the U.S. of providing safe passage to their U.S.-backed forces into Deir ez-Zor right through the ISIS positions. Remember when the U.S. said, well, we're supporting the rebels who are against ISIS and al-Qaeda? No. They're all working together. They're back to that situation of wanting to find some way to get Bashar al-Assad. And at this point, I hope he's taking personal precautions because the only option left for the United States right now is a decapitation strike against Bashar al-Assad and possibly Kim Jong-un as well. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, the thing about Trump, it's still amazing to me. When he was running for president, the way I had him figured was, well, here's a guy that has nothing to lose. He owes nothing to anybody in Washington. That's the way I looked at it. He owes nothing to anybody, and he'll just do the right thing, which is no mystery what doing the right thing would be. It would be throwing Hillary Clinton and some of the other criminals in jail.
Yeah.
And prosecute them. And instead, and also it would have been a rapprochement or whatever you want. He's a puppet. He doesn't, I mean, somebody's running him. I don't know, somebody's pulling his strings. I don't know how this happened exactly. They threatened to kill him and he's afraid, or exactly what happened. But it turned out to be totally the opposite of what I thought was going to happen in the first.
Well, we went through that same exercise with Barack Obama as well. He campaigned on stopping the wars his first day in office, and it never happened. I think at this point we understand that candidates lie to get elected. They actually think it is an exercise in freedom of speech to be able to lie to you to get your vote. I disagree. The First Amendment is there to protect the truth, not to protect lies and liars. But for whatever reason, as you say, they may have threatened to kill him. They may have shown him the films from Dealey Plaza and said, we can kill a president whenever we want to. We can get away with it, too. Or they could have threatened his family. We do know that his view of the world is heavily filtered by his advisors. Chief of Staff Kelly is like trying to keep Representative Rohrabaugh from getting to Donald Trump with information that undermines that whole Russia hacking the DNC email myth. We know that the CIA actually lied to Donald Trump, saying they had ironclad evidence that Assad gassed those people at Idlib, even though the story absolutely made no sense whatsoever. And I have to wonder, does Donald Trump not have his own computer where he can go out on the Internet and look at stuff, or are the Internet feeds into the White House that heavily filtered?
Well, they say he does not cruise the Internet. He never has. That's what I've read somewhere. So I don't know. He watches TV. So I guess he just turned out to be just basically he's just a big dummy is what he is. He's not that smart. He knows how to do construction, and that's it.
He may not be cruising the Internet now, but he certainly was during the campaign, because all of the hot button issues that he hit that built his base, throwing Hillary in prison, ending the wars, all the rest of that was stuff that was in the independent media. It was never on the corporate media. The corporate media was there protecting Hillary Clinton. But he knew that the American people wanted her thrown in jail. The only place he could have gotten that was from here on the Internet and the independent media. So he used to surf the Internet, and maybe they've got him so busy now that he can't. But for whatever reason, we did not get the Donald Trump we voted for.
Well, they got rid of the guys that were telling him the stuff, Bannon and Manafort and Roger Stone. They're not even able to talk to him anymore. So it's just a bad thing. When you got these 3- and 4-star generals, those guys, they're just about crazy. When they get that high of a rank. I was in the military myself for a long time, and these guys, when they get that much rank, it's just like they think they're pretty much. I mean, they're not really playing with a full deck anymore. They're nuts.
Well, they're
anyway,
arrogant. I mean, look at the fight between Douglas MacArthur and Harry Truman, where MacArthur literally came on out and went to the Congress and said, I'm really better at running this country than the president is, at which point Truman fired him. So, but again, it's enshrined in the Constitution. We're supposed to be under civilian leadership, but right now it does look like all these military people that have surrounded Donald Trump, they're actually calling the shots. We've had a very slow motion military coup d'etat, and that's a big reason why we are where we are, because the military, they love war. They love the smell of blood. They love all the money that gets poured into war, and that's all they can think of is money and promotion.
This Korea thing, in my opinion, they're just setting Trump up just to look like a fool, which he is. He looks like a fool. I don't think they're actually going to strike Korea with a military strike. They can't do that because Korea is going to destroy South Korea immediately at the same time. So that's why, I mean, even the South Koreans are not afraid, from what I've read about it. They don't think anything's going to happen. So,
well,
I
wouldn't rule out an attempted decapitation strike. And I'm seeing all these articles that are coming on in where they're saying basically at this point the bluff and bluster is over, and Trump is seriously considering or rather the generals around Donald Trump are considering some kind of a military strike. And part of the reason they're doing that is because the only real threat presented to the United States by North Korea is they're refusing to bow down. They're refusing to be bullied, and that's emboldening other nations to stand up and say, well, we don't want to be pushed around by the United States either. And that's why there's a mindset in Washington, D.C. We have to make an example of North Korea, that you do not stand up against the American empire. Send in the legions and give them what for.
The only way they could run Kim out of there, I think it's possible. It might be possible that they're trying to launch some kind of an internal coup. I'm sure they've tried to make contacts with some of those guys in there. I'm
sure they have, but North Korea security keeps arresting the spies. What I'm hearing from like Paul Craig Roberts is there are people in Washington D.C. talking about just an unprovoked nuclear attack on Pyongyang, just flatten the place, get rid of Kim Jong-un and his entire government and his military chain of command.
Okay, well, I hope that's not going to happen, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'll let you go, Mike.
I hope it's not going to happen either. I mean, Claire and I are feeling sort of a little vulnerable out here in the middle of the Pacific. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Atlanta alone do get a lot of taxpayer funds to build their stadiums and everything.
Somebody mentioned today that that they could have something revoked that would cost them $1 billion, and it was some type of tax exempt status. But do we have any way of researching any of these players, how much time or money they
yeah, it's on the net. I mean, some of these players they're making $10, $20, $40 million in their contracts. It's just it's really insane. Anyway, listen, we're going to talk about this a little more in depth a little further in the show, but I want to finish up on the war zone. So, James, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And it would be interesting to find out. I imagine that the NFL organization itself might be considered a nonprofit, but certainly the owners of the teams and the players, they're just raking the bucks in like crazy. Getting on back to the war zones. Basically, at this point, it is looking like, barring a decapitation strike by the United States against Assad, that Assad is going to retain control of Syria. And now the new push is to get this new Kurdistan going. And they had their referendum. The voting is over. The official results will be coming out tomorrow, but at this point it looks like a slam dunk. But the idea is basically to use the new Kurdistan to start carving out chunks from Iraq and Syria in order to weaken them. And, of course, that's been a big part of the U.S. Agenda. All the way back in 2001, Admiral Sebrowski outlined the U.S. strategy that all of the greater Middle East must be destroyed except for Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon. And I'm sure Israel's got their own designs on Lebanon. They still want that Litani River. So here's the problem. Right now, everybody is racing for the oil-rich eastern part of Syria, pitting these U.S.-backed forces, which now includes U.S. Special Forces, who were supposed to be there for medical assistance, and now they've been caught fighting with ISIS. And they're going up against the Russian-led coalition of Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. And so we're heading into the nightmare scenario of direct conflict between the United States and Russia, two nuclear-armed superpowers. And the only way a clash can be avoided is if one party backs down, which does not seem likely at this point. Now, up in Europe, remember all the big stink about Russia's drills in Russia and Belarus? They hold them every 2 years, regular as clockwork, and this last one, last month, just finished up. Everybody's going home, and the media was saying, oh, Russia's getting ready to invade Europe. They only pretend it's a military drill, but they're getting ready to invade Europe. And, of course, it didn't happen. And I remember back during the last Cold War, when it was always Russia's getting ready to attack this and Russia's getting ready to attack that. Never happened. But NATO is having their latest drill called Dragon 17, and they're very clearly exercising for a real war with Russia. They're not even trying to hide the fact that that's what they're getting ready to do. And again, do you see Russian warships tooling around the Gulf of Mexico? Do you see Russian bombers flying next to American borders? No, you don't. Little factoid, right now the U.S. is providing military assistance to 73% of all the world's dictators. We're going to take a phone call from Apostle up there in New Jersey. Aloha, Apostle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was doing a lot of thinking over the weekend, and you know that the U.S. is backing this Kurdish army in Syria.
Yes, and in Iraq.
And yes, but they pretty much want to make like a Kurdistan.
Yes.
But I also read an article saying that Israel will also send in like 20,000 troops, whatever, to help them out.
I didn't read that Israel is sending 20,000 troops. I did read that Israel is planning to send 200,000 Israelis of Kurdish descent to settle the new Kurdistan. And that's really what's making Iraq and Turkey very, very nervous, because if you look at those Kurdish independence rallies, there are all these flags of Israel flying back and forth, and Iraq is saying this would be a second Israel in the Middle East, and we already have our hands full with the one we've got.
Right, but again, that's the same point that I was thinking about. Do you think that maybe they're going to do this so they can hit the Euphrates to make it the greater Israel?
Well, it could be that the long-term plan is to somehow take. I mean, there's a huge gap on the map between Kurdistan and Israel, but yeah, they may be looking at Kurdistan as a future component of Eretz Israel. I mean, that's certainly Israel's long-term goal. They've made no bones about it. If you look at the flag of Israel, those blue lines at the top and bottom represent the Nile and the Euphrates.
I'm pretty sure that the eraser marks are out there, or whatever, so they can redo their lines, whatever, after they send in these 200,000 people, whatever, to
Israel's never
pretty much make residence there.
Israel has never formally defined their borders. It's all written out with dry erase marker. Israel's never actually formalized a constitution for how their government is supposed to operate. And Israel won't commit to any borders because they don't like the borders they've got now. They want to grab a little bit more.
Right, but they're going to grab a hell of a lot more, whatever, if they make this Kurdistan, whatever, 200,000 people in there. Next thing you know is I'm pretty sure that the Kurds are going to be treated just as well as they treat the Palestinians.
I have no doubt of it whatsoever. Of course, part of the problem is that Iraq has been treating the Kurds very, very poorly. The Kurds represent the world's largest stateless ethnic group. I think there's something like 30 million of them.
Well, if you look at history, whatever, or any of the history books, whatever, I thought that the Jewish people considered them that. Not that they consider them the victims in every crime, whatever that goes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Israel's a master at playing the victim card, and they do it over and over. And fortunately, everybody's now recognizing that's what Israel does with all these hate crime hoaxes. And, they fired a bottle rocket in to Israel. Oh, my hairstyle, I just had it done, and they launch a counterattack.
Right, and they're not launching bottle rockets back.
No, they're launching the very best that U.S. and Israel...
U.S. money can buy.
Yeah, that U.S. money can... that your tax money can buy is being dropped all over Gaza and Palestine. All right, we're going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, turning over to Iran, we are still not getting a definitive word on what Donald Trump is planning on doing, but the leaking is that he is going to refuse to certify Iran's compliance with the P5+1 deal in October, next month, which is when it comes up for recertification. And that will give Congress the option of voting to add more sanctions to Iran or to end the deal. And there's a real problem with that because Trump is talking about just canceling this agreement with Iran unilaterally. At the same time, he's trying to promise North Korea that if they'll surrender their nuclear weapons, the U.S. Will just leave them alone. And North Korea knows that that's absolutely a lie, even without the issue of the Iran deal, because they saw Libya surrender their nuclear weapons, the U.S. went in there. Syria surrendered their chemical weapons, the U.S. went in there. Iraq surrendered their chemical weapons, the U.S. invaded there. So North Korea has every reason to expect that the U.S. is gunning for them, and surrendering their nuclear weapons will not slow anything down. Ends that P5+1 deal, that's basically going to punctuate that reality that when you are in the crosshairs of the U.S. government, you're going to be invaded, and it doesn't matter what you surrender, what compromises you make, what concessions you make, they're going to come and get you and regime change you and make you part of the New World Order's corporatocracy, which is going all over the world here. And also because so much of Europe is in favor of keeping the P5+1 deal. If Trump pulls out of the deal, it's going to damage our relations with many of our European partners who are also going to realize you can't trust the U.S. government to keep a promise. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call from Terry in Oregon. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, the big bad communists were the big threat when I was growing up.
Yes.
And I want to do my part to fight the communists. Otherwise, the domino theory was going to take over and all these countries were going to fall and world communism was going to be our fate, which is we're going to be slaves. So I went down and joined the Marine Corps, and when I was filling out my papers, I had, there's about 5 questions. Are you a member of the Communist Party or you're your parents? And I had to say certify I wasn't gay and all that sort of thing. And we went to fight communists over in Vietnam, and we went over I Corps. But today, the troops got to realize they're fighting for communism. They're fighting for world communism is what they're doing, but they're not calling it that. It's completely opposite of what we were doing. Now, the other day, you mentioned that they have these people they hire to fight these wars for us, and they're not going to be dedicated because they're not part of our country, not defending our country. Well, today they're not defending our country anyway, so our troops, our American troops, might have the same problem. They're going to realize, that they're not defending America, and they're going to think, why are we doing this? And they might have the same problem, that these foreign troops might have, that we hire for mercenaries. And they should know that, they're not going to call it communism, but that's what they're really fighting for, and that's just my opinion.
Well, I'm sure. Have you ever read the treatise called War is a Racket by Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler?
Oh, yeah, he's my hero.
Yeah, well, he
33 years he put in.
Yes. And he's famous for that War is a Racket, where, he played the game and he followed all his orders, and then when he retired, he looked back over his career and realized that nothing he had done in 33 years in the Marine Corps had been to defend the United States of America. It was all about going into other countries and leaving them wide open for American corporations to plunder. And it's still going on today. This is all driven, again, in Syria. They're racing to capture control of the oil fields. This is a war between the U.S.
myself.
Well, I'm glad you made it through alive.
Yeah, and, I just had that one combat tour, and so I made it through, and I'm realizing the same thing he did.
Yep.
But today, we're fighting for Israel. We're fighting for greater Israel. We shouldn't be there at all. It's just a waste of money, waste of lives, and we're going in destroying these people. And I think the troops somehow are going to get the message. I know they're young and naive, and they may not, but
some of them are like Lieutenant Aaron Watada. If it got through to him, it's getting through to a lot. Unfortunately, when you're in the war zone, and you try and speak out or express any doubts, the military will sort of discourage you from doing that. We have to take a break for station identification. Terry, thank you very much for the phone call. And again, glad you made it through your military service in one piece. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday called a special meeting of his security cabinet following Iran's testing of a ballistic missile that can reach Israel over the weekend. And so he's on there saying that the Iran missile threat. Well, again, go back and look at your history. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years. Standing in sharp contrast to Israel, which can't seem to go for 6 months without attacking Lebanon or Syria or the West Bank or Gaza. Iran, like North Korea, is building a deterrent to say, don't come mess with us. But I would not be surprised to see Israel just haul off with a bombing mission into Iran the way they did in Iraq at the Osirak power station, where Israel declared that Iraq was building nuclear weapons in the basement of this power station, and they just flew into Iraq and bombed the heck out of the power station. And then years later, following the Iraq War, international experts examined the power station, and that's all they found, a power station. There was no secret bomb factory in the basement the way Israel has in Dimona. And again, Israel's been screaming that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear bomb for 30 years now. And it hasn't happened. But if Israel were to attack Iran to try and strike at their missile sites, Iran would probably strike back, and the United States has already committed to come to Israel's aid in any war, even if Iran starts it. And that was a very reckless promise to make, because in effect, you have put Israel in charge of America's military. Because Israel can start a war knowing America's military will be following in behind them. Meanwhile, Israeli officials are advancing plans for the construction of yet another 2,000 new settler units in the occupied West Bank, irrespective of the international outcry against the Israeli regime's land expropriation and settlement expansion policies in the Palestinian territories. So they're just building more and more of these illegal settlements. And every time the United Nations tries to do something about it, the United States stands up and goes, veto, 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 veto. Latest Gallup poll, this is from back on September 17th, 71% of Americans are dissatisfied with the way the nation is being governed, and I am certainly one of them. Because we see the United States not being governed for the American people. It's being governed for the benefit of Israel. It's being governed for the refugees. It's being governed for the illegal immigrants. It's being governed for the military-industrial complex. It's being governed for the medical-industrial complex. It's being governed for the security-industrial complex. And our standard of living and quality of life is plunging, even as taxes and costs continue to skyrocket. We're being driven down to third world standard of living, and that, of course, is part of the globalist plan. The plan for planet Earth under the New World Order global government is that everybody except the rulers are going to be living in mud huts. The rulers will be living, of course, in these fabulous palaces. Now, getting on down to Puerto Rico, it is a mess. We're starting to get aerial photos coming on out. They still have no electricity, no cell service. Right now, Puerto Rico's biggest problem is they can't get messages out. To say, here's what we need. There's widespread looting. Apparently, San Juan, the streets are considered unsafe because of all the rioting and looting. And we're not talking about looters who are just out there helping themselves to TV sets at the local store. We're talking about people who are stealing basic living necessities from each other. And that's how bad it is. This Puerto Rico's trying to reconnect with the rest of the world and try and get some help in there. The situation is disastrous. They're begging for help. And the logistics problems are just a nightmare. Puerto Rico's hospitals have been running on emergency diesel generators. They're starting to run out of fuel. And they're saying, without the generators, the hospitals can't function. People are going to start dying. Now, a lot of people are still concerned about the Guatataca Dam. There were concerns it was going to collapse and flood 3 towns in Puerto Rico. It hasn't collapsed yet, but they're saying that there is still a danger. And there is a flash flood warning in the eastern Isabela municipalities. Something else that's been left in the wake of all these hurricanes in the Caribbean, pets are going feral. People, when they evacuated the island, they weren't allowed to take their pets with them. The dogs are starting to pack up and revert to wild. And apparently that's causing even more difficulty for the people trying to repair things, trying to get back to a normal life. They've got these packs of wild dogs going on out there. By the way, little side note. First of all, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. If you come to visit here in Hawaii, you will see cats all over the place, and they look like normal house cats. Calicos, tabbies, they look just like your pets. Do not try and pick them up or pet them because they are wild. They're the descendants of the ship's mousers from the days of the whaling trade, where the ships would have cats to keep the rodents under control. The cats would come ashore, and they would do what cats would normally do. They're wild animals. They don't look like it, but they are. If you pick one up, you might be in for a very ugly surprise here. Now, there is a new scandal swirling around Florida Governor Rick Scott, and it centers on that nursing home where 11 people died after the air conditioning failed. Now, the people at the nursing home are saying they called the governor's office directly. He never got the message. Somebody got a look at his voicemail and discovered there have been multiple deletions. So 4 voicemail messages left on Governor Rick Scott's personal cell phone by the nursing home were deleted. That's going to come back to haunt him. Boy, the whole planet is rocking and rolling. We've had these 3 major quakes in Mexico, a major quake up on Cascadia, now in the nation of Bali, they're evacuating 50,000 people because it looks like Mount Agung is going to erupt. So the whole planet's rocking and rolling here. All right, so let's talk about this nonsense about the football players disrespecting the national anthem. And this has spun totally out of control. And there's a couple of conflicting, contrasting issues. First of all, I understand that the ACLU would come on out and say that kneeling during the anthem or sitting during the anthem is a form of protest protected by the First Amendment, even though technically it is illegal to disrespect the anthem, and for that matter, the flag. U.S. Code Title 36, Subtitle I, Part A, Chapter 3, Section 301, 36 U.S. Code. Okay. It basically says the national anthem, you will stand and you will do the appropriate respect. You will face the flag. So there's 2 conflicting views. It's illegal. It's a form of protest. And I can understand why these football players are not enthusiastic about the United States of America right now. I certainly am not. However, I think this is being fanned up. Private lives have every right to First Amendment freedom of expression. But people don't go to football games to see the players' politics. And just like the Emmys took a major hit, lowest ratings ever, when all those Celebrities got up there and just assumed that we ordinary people just couldn't wait to hear what the celebrities' political opinions were. No, actually, we watch movie stars to act. We watch athletes to play games. And in those contexts, we're not watching the Emmys because we want to get politics. We're not watching the football games because we want to get politics. We're up to our neck in politics. We're sick to death of politics. Entertainment and sports are supposed to be our distractions, where we get to leave that behind. And the public backlash against the NFL has been intense. Their ratings are sinking faster than a submarine with screen doors. They're taking a major, major financial hit. People are not tuning in. Angry NFL fans are literally burning jerseys over protests, saying you can take your NFL and you can shove it. You're being paid to go on out there and play ball and do what the fans want you to do, and they're paid handsomely for that. Apparently there's this guy who was a Steelers fan going back to 1966. He had a team jacket. He set that on fire. We're seeing that all over social media. People are burning their season tickets and their jerseys. Apparently NFL fans are burning tickets to next week's Giants versus Chargers game as a form of protest. So this is really taken off, and I think it's a great deal of nonsense. More to the point, though, I think it was undignified for Donald Trump to even get involved in this at all. And maybe he is feeling so controlled over Obamacare and the wars and immigration that he wanted to go out and just do something. And his handler said, well, yeah, all right, go ahead and bash the NFL if you want. But I really don't see a president as getting involved in something like this. I don't think we would have seen John F. Kennedy stoop that low. Now, Anthony Weiner has been sentenced to 21 months in prison for sending explicit text to the teenager. The court did not buy the claim that the teenager was the instigator and that she led Anthony Weiner on because she wanted to have an influence on the election. Anthony could have gotten 10 years. But apparently there was a plea deal that if the sentence was anywhere between 20 and 24 months that he would not appeal it. So he's on his way to prison, and I imagine they've got him a nice, comfortable prison. You need to understand prison culture, because there's a hierarchy in there based on the crime that you're in there for. And sexual exploitation of children is right at the very bottom. Now, we're still following along with Maxine Waters, and a lot of people were just shocked that she went to the funeral to deliver the eulogy for recently passed comedian Dick Gregory. And she turned it into, we got to get Trump, we got to get rid of him. And apparently she's now over there at the Congressional Black Caucus urging them to support her calls for impeachment. And Waters is saying it doesn't matter if there's no evidence in the Russia investigation because Congress can define impeachment as whatever it wants. In point of fact, Maxine, you are wrong. There must be a high crime or misdemeanor that was committed by the official being impeached. You can't just say we're going to get rid of you because we don't like you. It doesn't work that way. And there is no evidence in the Russia investigation. They're trying to make a big deal over the fact that Jared Kushner used a private email account for some official business. And that came about only because people were contacting him at his private email address rather than going through his official address. But it's another nothing burger they're trying to turn into a major scandal. At the same time, still pretending that Hillary's private email server didn't represent Title 18 violations regarding espionage. And then corporate media and the government wonder why their credibility is an all-time low. All right, let's look at the economic news here. And again, if you have young people that you need to buy toys for Christmas, you might want to do your shopping now. because it looks like Toys R Us may not make it to the holiday shopping season. I was talking to one of the people over there at Toys R Us saying, how's it going? How much longer are you going to be here? And they said, we're not sure, but probably not long. It turns out that $5.5 billion in commercial mortgage-backed securities is now exposed to Toys R Us bankruptcy. They're still playing with mortgage-backed securities, only instead of residential units, they're commercial bundles. Wall Street has not learned any lessons from the crash of 2008 because Wall Street did not have to pay for the damage. You, the American taxpayer, did. So they're still playing their games, their get-rich-quick schemes. And when they work, they keep all the money. And when they go bust, the taxpayers pick up the tab. That is a hallmark of fascism. You make money, you get to keep it. You lose money, the ordinary people are forced to pay the losses. Mussolini used to say that fascism ought to be more properly called corporatism, because it's the alignment of corporate and government power against the general population. We certainly seem to have that in this country today. Mandated vaccines, mandated products, this and that. Companies indemnified against civil litigation. It does look like the government is firmly on the side of the corporations, and it's not supposed to be. The government is supposed to be an arbiter, sitting right in the middle, balancing the needs of the general population and the greed and the desires of the corporation, and chart the best course for the nation as a whole. Our current government is fully on board with the money junkies. And we're all paying the price for it. Go down your local street, look at the retail vacancies, look at the cracked pavement, look at the homeless and the hungry. I'm not surprised that Gallup poll came up with 71% of Americans saying they don't approve of the way this country is being governed. Because it's not being governed for our benefit. And that is pretty much obvious. Now, as you know, Germany had their elections yesterday. Angela Merkel she's going to get another term as chancellor, but just by a narrow margin. And yes, there's already allegations of election fraud here. And apparently Merkel's CDU party had the worst result in any German election since 1949. And as a result, the pound has leaped against the euro. So she may have won, but only just barely, and it's having serious repercussions. Now, the surprise, and a lot of people were expecting this, the Alternative for Germany party came in third place, but they took 89 seats in the Bundestag. That is a huge block, and Merkel's now going to have to deal with them. It's going to make the formation of a coalition government that much more difficult. AfD got enough seats where they can't be sidelined, they can't be minimized, they can't be ignored. So even though Angela Merkel is still chancellor, she's taken a major political hit. And they're saying that she may have won her fourth term, but it's cost dearly. Now, Angela Merkel, even though she won, you could tell she was upset at the result. She wasn't expecting AfD to do that well. And she came on out and said, we need to win back those AfD voters. We have a new challenge. We need to get the AfD voters away from the AfD. I have a solution there, Angela. Close the borders. That's what took voters away from you and the second leading party, was that open borders refugee crisis. And if you're not going to close the borders, AfD is going to continue to make gains. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Angela Merkel's poor performance in the election yesterday, and yes, she won, but narrow margin, came as a shock. And it looks like this is going to kill Macron's federal Europe dream, because one of the other unexpected winners in yesterday's election was the Free Democratic Party, and they support a free market. And so Emmanuel Macron and Jean-Claude Juncker's dream for a federal Europe complete with its own Eurozone budget and finance minister is in serious, serious trouble. What they're trying to do to Europe is what Washington, D.C. did to the United States. They took what was originally a confederation of sovereign, independent states and brought them under single control. And I think we can pretty much agree it didn't work out all that well. So the people of Europe are really starting to dig in against the EU having any more power. Because the larger these empires get, the more abusive they become. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the voting has ended in the Kurdistan independence referendum. They're now counting the votes, and the results will be released tomorrow officially. But at this point, it looks like it's a slam dunk that the Kurds are voting for independence. Now, there's a long way to go, because this referendum is not being recognized by Baghdad, and it doesn't actually compel the Kurdish government to take any immediate steps. It's more of a sense of the people. But a lot of governments around are very, very nervous. The U.S. is in favor of the new Kurdistan. Israel's in favor of the new Kurdistan. Their goal is to break up the greater Middle East into little tiny nations that are easy to push around and bully and exploit. But Iraq is very, very concerned that most of the new proposed Kurdistan is going to be coming out of their country, including a lot of highly important oil fields. And they've been threatening to cancel the referendum. They've threatened retaliation. Turkey is out there saying that Baghdad is Iraq's legitimate authority for the whole country, and saying that the vote will not contribute to regional peace and stability, which is being echoed by the United Nations itself. Apparently, the Turkish army is at the border of Iraq and ready to take necessary steps, according to Erdogan. And what they're talking about is a decap strike on the Kurdish government. Erdogan is threatening to invade Iraq and take out that Kurdish government. And obviously, with that as an objective, I don't think Iraq would get in his way. Maybe Erdogan is going to do Baghdad's dirty work for them. Now, Turkey and Iran are conducting a massive military drill near the Kurdish regions of Iraq. And Iran has closed their airspace to Iraqi Kurdistan ahead of the vote. Well, obviously the vote is now over. But they've basically declared a no-fly zone. So the sense seems to be that with the referendum over and the majority voting for independence, that certain interests like the U.S. and Israel are going to move to make it actually start to happen. And the U.S. forces are in the region. And they may decide that that's the new reason to go to war against Syria. Well, you know, we have to fight for the right of Kurdistan to break away, which is going to be an interesting exercise when you contrast that with how the United States responded to the Crimean independence referendum, where they talked about protecting the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we couldn't possibly have an independence referendum. So once again, we have the U.S. Saying one thing, doing something else, and the propaganda is fighting against each other. Now, Iran and Russia are supporting Iraq's territorial integrity and regional security. So once again, they're at odds with the United States and Israel. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Spain, as you know, they're getting ready to come up on their independence referendum. Spain's prime minister is asking Catalan separatist leaders to own up to the fact that they can't hold an outlawed independence referendum after a crackdown dealt them a serious blow. They arrested all the leaders, they've charged them, they've seized all the ballot boxes. Catalan basically is the wallet for all of Spain. And that's a big part of the issue. The Catalans are very tired of being taxed and having very little of it come back from the Spanish government. But there's also the globalist agenda. The globalists are in a panic at all these regions trying to break away and form new little countries. That's going in the wrong direction. They're trying to merge them all together, leading to that one planet, one government, one private central bank. And you have Crimea splitting off. You have Kurdistan getting ready to split off. Now you've got Catalan talking about splitting off. You have a number of states in the United States talking about secession. It's not going very well for the globalists here. Meanwhile, the largest newspaper in Spain is out there saying that this whole Catalonia pro-independence thing, it's all the diabolical hand of Putin's Russia. It's all the fault of Russia. Russia's coming on in and just feeding these Catalonians these ideas about freedom and independence. It's all Putin's fault. By the way, have you noticed that since Merkel did win her fourth term as Chancellor of Germany, they dropped that whole thing about we're afraid Russia's going to interfere with our election? Just went away, like it never happened here. Now, Europe, up until recently, was trying to stay out of this Catalonia independence vote, said it's really not our business. Unfortunately, they've now changed their mind, and they're coming on in and saying, yeah, we're also opposed to this Catalonia independence vote. So, still trying to stop this trend of people deciding they want to go off and be their own country, which, by the way, is guaranteed to them under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, in Catalan, there are demonstrations all over the place, and it's only been getting more intense ever since Madrid tried to block the referendum. And basically Madrid has simply declared it's illegal. And again, no, it is not under the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But Spain, Madrid, is going to be in serious economic trouble if Catalan breaks free. It's like the same situation in the European Union with Great Britain struggling to split off. Great Britain and Germany have been carrying the economic load for the entire Union. And with Britain gone, Germany can't do it all on its own. The German people are already fed up with this. That's a big reason why yesterday's election results were the way they are. So apparently, over in Great Britain, John McDonnell has thrown Labour's position on Brexit into disarray, basically saying that we need to stay inside the single market. Now, Nigel Farage is getting sick and tired of the Tories' failures for Brexit. And so he is getting ready to form a new political party to argue for let's Brexit and Brexit now. Now, Theresa May is out there already negotiating the divorce payments. And by the way, there never was such a thing in Article 5 of the European Union. Article 5 gives the member states the right to leave whenever they want. There's nothing in there about they have to pay a huge amount of money. And Theresa May, I think, has offered something like 20 billion pounds, and Brussels is saying, no, it's got to be 40. So it's far from being a done deal. And again, right now, the New World Order, the globalists, are desperate. They are just desperate to stop all of this and get back on the path of merging countries together, blending their populations together, leading to that utopian paradise of the one world government. And I think we can all agree, looking at what's going on in Brussels and Washington, D.C., the larger and more powerful a government becomes, the more abusive they are to their populations. And a one-world government is going to be history's most rigid dictatorship. They're not going to be able to allow freedom of speech or they won't survive all the lies and deception that they're going through in their own creation. Apparently, down in Australia, a 12-year-old girl was gang raped by a group of Muslim boys. So they're having their own problems with all of these individuals. By the way, remember last Friday, Tennessee church attack? Shooter turned out to be a Sudanese immigrant, Emmanuel Sampson. Refugee from Sudan, walked into a church in Tennessee and shot it up. Aren't open borders wonderful? Aren't they just a blessing on all of our lives? All right, getting over to the world of political correctness. As you know, there is a new TV show called Orville. It's sort of a spoof of the Star Trek franchise or Galaxy Quest. And Seth MacFarlane has put this together, and it's been very, very funny. The last episode over the weekend, though, they moved away from straight comedy, and they started getting political. Regarding, they were making a sort of oblique reference to this issue of transgenderism and forcing children to be a gender other than what they were born to be. And so maybe Seth is going to start using his platform to make some commentary here. And I thought they made some very, very valid points here. Meanwhile, over at Bath Spa University, there's a student who's going through training to be a therapist, working on his master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy, and he wanted to have his master's thesis be on detransition. In other words, he wanted to study people who have decided to reverse their gender reassignment operations. And there are people who have gone through gender reassignment, and they've discovered, no surprise there, it didn't really make their life better. They're still just as confused and unhappy and messed up as they were before. And so this master's candidate wanted to study that. And his Bath Spa University said that rejected the thesis. The university's ethics committee said you cannot do a study on detransition. It's not politically correct. That was it. They didn't find anything wrong with his idea or his methodology other than it was politically incorrect. You can't do that. You can't talk about people who are unhappy after they've had gender transition surgery. We all know that they're going to be deliriously happy when they've changed their gender. No, it doesn't always work. In fact, a lot of these people, after going through the surgery, there's a very high suicide rate because it doesn't really fix the problems in their life. And more people are realizing that a lot of people who are just very confused about themselves because of this society that we're in, where we have 67 different gender pronouns now, and if you use the wrong one, you get fined in California. And one of the issues they were raising in this episode of Orville was these decisions are being made for very young children before they really understand what's going on. We're hearing about these liberal mothers who are they're absolutely convinced their son is really a girl, and they're trying to raise him as a girl. That's going to mess him up. And so he grows up. Mommy told me I'm really a girl inside, and he goes and has the surgery, and it doesn't work because he's still unhappy, he's still confused. I think we ought to leave well enough alone. But again, part of the goal of the New World Order is to just destroy all of our history, destroy our sense of cultural, regional identity, get us so confused we don't even know what bathroom we're supposed to use. And if you go back and you look at George Orwell's 1984, you would be astounded about how many of the techniques, if you will, used by that totalitarian government. Now, George Orwell wrote it as a warning to future generations. not as an instruction manual for our government. Unfortunately, too many people seem to be using it that way. Now, over in the Netherlands, there's been an interesting development regarding the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 investigation. And supposedly, this international investigation in the Netherlands was being done in the Netherlands to guarantee that it was going to be fair and impartial and objective, and it is anything but. Russia has handed the Dutch investigators primary radar data that covers the flight zone of Flight 17 at the exact time of the incident, and it shows that an anti-aircraft battery fired from inside Ukrainian army-held territory in eastern Ukraine. Talk about an inconvenient truth. And the Dutch investigators have simply filed the radar data, and it will not be included in their final report. They're just dismissing it out of hand because it threatens the predetermined narrative on the downing of Flight 17 that it was all those Russian, and Putin shot it down with his shotgun. So let's talk about some science and medical stuff going on here. Story out of 12160.info. It's turning out now that children's asthma medication may cause nightmares and mental health issues. Of course, if your child is on asthma medication and starts showing symptoms, what are they going to do? Take them off the asthma medication? No, they'll give them prescription psychiatric medication, which will probably make the problem worse. And by the way, speaking of asthma, we know that we're in the middle of this incredible soaring epidemic of autism, which didn't exist before mercury-based preservatives and vaccines, or vaccines in general. Asthma was something that was very rare when I was a kid. And today, so many kids seem to have it. Is it something else where somebody's made a mistake and doesn't want to admit it? Remember that report that came out about a month ago showing that unvaccinated children overall were much healthier than children who had all the mandated vaccines. We know that the, again, exploding epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis seems to have begun when they started using peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant. Because you're supposed to eat peanut oil, not shoot it into your blood veins. But it makes money, and that's all that really matters. Yeah. What? Not in here, no. Sorry about that. I have a communication from the boss. Okay, so where are we? Okay, story coming out of Natural Blaze. Will opioid lawsuits by county officials against Big Pharma set the legal precedent to sue vaccine makers? And that's an important question because you need to remember the Homeland Security Act, the act that created the Department of Homeland Security, had a rider in it that indemnified vaccine makers from being sued for damage caused by their product. And, of course, if you have somebody who's told that it doesn't matter what you make, you will never be sued for the bad product, you're going to see more bad product come on out. We certainly saw that with computers and software. Everybody who thinks they have suffered harm from a vaccine, they have to go to the vaccine court. And the vaccine court usually will wave around that CDC report saying there's no link between autism and vaccines, even though that report has been discredited. So apparently Delaware County is suing the pharmaceutical industries. And according to Delaware County Councilman David White, he's saying those pharmaceutical companies have made billions of dollars off the deaths of our children and loved ones. And big pharma companies have a significant presence in the suburban counties surrounding Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. However, being neighbors doesn't matter, since Delaware County, the southeast Pennsylvania county constituting some of their western suburbs, filed a lawsuit on September 21st against 11 pharmaceutical companies regarding the overwhelming opioid epidemic and vaccine autism problem. And the reason for the lawsuit is the amount of money Delaware County and other expenses due to the opioid drug crisis. And when we talk about the opioid crisis, we're not talking about going on down to the street corner and getting a little baggie from the guy standing on the street light. We're talking about doctors writing prescriptions for opium-based pain medications, being incentivized by the sellers of the opium-based pain medications to write the prescriptions. And they're getting people hooked who trust their doctors, trust their pharmacists, and all of a sudden they're hooked on opium. And there's a big political kickback system involved there. Over in Alabama, Attorney General Luther Strange, while he was Attorney General, received more campaign contributions than any other U.S. Attorney General from members of a controversial lobby group peddling the dangerous prescription pain medication business in the middle of an ongoing opioid crisis in Alabama. So now the doctors and the pharmacies are pushing that Afghanistan heroin. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently California is already getting ready for North Korea to nuke them. I know that here in Hawaii, the government says they're making preparations. I don't know what they could really do. We don't have any shelters. Well, the military do. They've got a lot of shelters, but there's not enough room in there for us ordinary hoi polloi here. Getting on back to the science news, as if those people in Flint, Michigan did not have so many problems going on. If you remember all the way back, Michael Moore's Roger and Me, his first documentary that made him a star, was all about the economy of Flint, Michigan, with the shuttering of the car plants. And then, of course, we had that water crisis where the city of Flint, to save a few bucks, disconnected from a commercial water system and started taking water from the Flint River and skimped even more by not putting the chemical in there that would have protected the water pipes, resulting in high levels of lead and other heavy metal contaminations. And now on top of it, statistics are showing that since that Flint water crisis, fetal deaths are up 58%, meaning spontaneous abortions, miscarriages, up 58%. And women are finding it harder and harder to get pregnant at all. And this is being reported in 12160 and also over in womensystems.com, where they're saying the Flint water is killing unborn babies, and many moms who are drinking it cannot get pregnant. So, again, back to that Gallup poll. Is this nation being governed very well? No, it isn't. How can we be a nation that has gone from the prosperity of the 50s and the achievements in space of the 60s to this third world poverty-stricken nation that we have today, where you can't even trust the water that's coming out of your faucet? Now, about 2 weeks ago, there was a story that broke that showed a link between the seasonal flu shot and miscarriages. And it's a very strong link. There's obviously a correlation there. And so the vaccine apologists are trying to explain it away and say, we don't need to change any of our policies. We don't need to change the vaccine schedule. We're sure that there's something else going on here. Couldn't possibly be the vaccines. The vaccines are wonderful. I remember there was this retired nurse that Claire and I knew briefly. We kind of held her hand through the suicide of her husband. And we got onto the subject of vaccines one day, and she just got all defensive. No, vaccines are great. Vaccines are wonderful. We would never do anything that would cause you harm. And you could almost tell she knew. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this is the part of the program when we talk about computers and such related things as well here. Last week we reported on a new vector for malware, and it showed up first on CCleaner or CRUD Cleaner. And the way it worked is the people who write CCleaner came up with an installer, and then they sent the installer to the server that handles the downloads. The hackers got into the server handling the downloads and replaced the legitimate installer with one of their own that had the new version of CCleaner with some malware. And it's turning out that that outbreak was much worse than it first appeared. It was targeting Microsoft, Cisco, and VMware with this mysterious payload. They're still not even sure what it was going to do. It appears to be stealing a lot of information, but they're not sure where it's going. Now, if you buy a new car, you're probably not going to be too surprised to find out that it does come with a GPS tracker, not for the police, not for the government, but for the loan company. And there is a company, Cromtech Security Center, that basically sells these GPS trackers that are put on cars that are sold on credit. So if you miss a payment, the repossession guy knows where the car is. Doesn't have to hunt it down, can just go and take it. Well, apparently all the data that they have been collecting on all these drivers was left on a leaky AWS S3 bucket. And basically, there were 540,000 ID numbers associated with SVR tracking. And the data left lying around includes logins, passwords, emails, vehicle identification numbers, IMEI numbers of GPS devices, and other data that is collected on the devices, customers, and auto dealerships. So, yes, the cyber criminals are a problem. But the other part of it is that these companies that are entrusted with this data, they're lax. Maybe they're saving money by not having somebody that is dedicated to the security of their data. Maybe security is assigned to somebody who's already got about 16 other jobs. And when he's done with those others, he'll look at security. But we're seeing all this stuff, unpatched software, data left on wide open Amazon cloud servers. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like to use the cloud. And unfortunately, as we go along, more and more devices are forcing you to use the cloud to some extent. Which brings me to the iPhone. Apparently, the iPhone 8 release has been a disaster. Nobody's buying them. And it may be that people just don't feel like spending the money, or they're waiting for the iPhone 10, which will be out a little bit later. But interestingly enough, there are some articles suggesting, implying that Apple will send out patches to iPhones to slow them down, to get you to buy the new model. And apparently there was a study done at Harvard that basically went on out and did searches, web searches for iPhone slow, and just counted how many of them were occurring, and they showed that these searches for iPhone slow spiked just before the release of a new iPhone each and every time. The study was performed by a student, Laura Trucco, and the study also compared the results to Samsung Galaxy Slow and found the same spike in searches did not occur before the release of a new Samsung phone. So it's planned obsolescence. And a lot of people have wondered over the years, every time Microsoft comes out with a new operating system, your existing operating systems also seem to slow down or develop other problems. Now, again, in a healthy economy where people have disposable income, you can get away with that stuff. You can't in an economy where people are living paycheck to paycheck. They just don't have the money. So Apple is dealing with tremendous disappointment about the new iPhone 8, and a lot of people are very concerned about the iPhone 10, especially during the failure of the facial recognition system. Now, there's an interesting article. This came out of ZDNet talking about jailbreaking your connected coffee machine, the idiocy of things. And it's talking about how everything is now requiring connectivity. For example, you've got a printer, and instead of buying your cartridges at the office store, you're on a subscription plan. And the printer will notify the company that sells the ink cartridges when you need to have new ink cartridges sent to you. And as long as you've got internet and connectivity and Wi-Fi, it's all going to work. But if it stops working, you can have a serious problem. And I'll give you a real-world example, because this actually happened to us. Claire has a particular piece of music software that she uses, and it's a perpetual license, which is getting to be a rare beast. Nobody wants to sell you a perpetual license. They want to rent to you month after month after month. But we have this particular piece of music software is on a perpetual license, but it still checks in with a licensing server every time she uses it. So over the weekend, she's working on some music, and all of a sudden, the software stops. She's doing all the work. When she saves her work, it's an empty blank file. And she's in a panic, understandably. She's thinking, what am I doing? Well, it turns out it wasn't her fault. It turns out that the company that runs the licensing server, without notifying anybody, changed the ports that it communicates with. And so I reconfigured the ports on our router going to her machine, and it came back up and started working again. But what happens if you're relying on all this connected stuff and you can't get a connection? That's not very good. One of the reasons I kept my old iPod, aside from sentimentality, was actually a gift from the Lost Production, is because the music is right there inside that device. Even though I've turned off all the iCloud settings I can find in the iPhone, the music is always being sent back up to the cloud. And on this island, there are a lot of areas where there simply isn't cell coverage or Wi-Fi coverage. Or if there's cell coverage, it doesn't have the data link. And when you're in those areas, all of a sudden you can't listen to your music anymore, unless you're using an older iPod, which doesn't know about the cloud. So we're being forced to be dependent on a system that could stop at any time. I remember another company where I was using their products, again, perpetual licenses, but they checked in with the license server every time you started them. Company went out of business. Instant unusable software. Now then, in order to provide a service to our users, I did go ahead and upgrade my iPhone to the new iOS 11. I also did my iPad. iPad seems to be fine. The iPhone, there are some issues you need to be aware of. For one thing, certain applications like Mail now will fetch in the background. On the last iteration of iOS, the Mail application had to be open before it would download Mail. And I didn't realize that while I had this phone sitting here with iPhone 11, it was downloading copies of everything that was coming to my desktop. And all of a sudden, I've got 260 emails in my inbox that I've already read. Now, it is possible you have to go into settings to turn fetch off, which, by the way, will improve your battery power. But it comes on back to a serious shortcoming in the iPhone's Mail application that people have been screaming about for years. There's no way to bulk delete from one of the mailboxes. You can bulk delete once it's in the trash, but the only way to get it in the trash is click a button, delete, click a button, delete, click a message, delete, click a message, delete, which, if you have 240 messages, that can take a lot of time. And it's very, very frustrating. The other problem I've noticed is, and for you people on BAM user, on the mail icon on the iPhone, there's a little red circle that says I have 74 email messages inside there. The mailbox actually is empty, and I can't get that little icon to go away or even change the number. And there doesn't seem to be any way to fix that one. So there are issues. I understand that people who are using cloud-based Office and email are having connectivity issues. Now, I can't speak to that because I'm just interacting with my desktop computer here, and that part seems to work. Apparently, there's another issue in that if you are updating anything on your iPad, iPhone, do it through iTunes, because apparently the over-the-air updates have their own series of problems. So, again, they rushed the product out before it was really ready. And, again, especially with that lack of a bulk delete on the mailboxes, people have been screaming about that for years. And you'd think Apple would actually listen. But as far as I can tell, iOS 11 was all about throwing more whiz-bang at you rather than addressing the shortcomings that it inherited from its earlier iterations. And that, unfortunately, has been something we've seen in software companies for a very, very long time. They want to add a new whiz-bang to lure more people to buy the product, and problems that have been in the software for several iterations are simply not addressed. At this point, though, it's clear that Apple isn't reading their own users. They have a user page where people can get in and register complaints. Apple's not reading it. Maybe they fired the people that are reading it. Of course, right now, with Apple being seriously in trouble with the sales of the iPhone 8, they may have let a lot of the staff go. And for some reason, it's always the quality assurance staff that gets fired first. And that just accelerates the decline. I remember when Claire had her Samsung Galaxy, and I just thought that Android system was just a royal pain. And now I'm looking at the new iOS 11 on my iPhone, and they moved everything around to make it look like it's a new operating system. But there's very little about it that's really all that new. It's more cosmetic than content. And like I said, that's the iPhone. The iPad appears to be cool. Of course, I haven't spent that much time with it. Now then, apparently, advertisers are now able to target Facebook users based on where they go in the real world. Shades of Minority Report. The social network is allowing thousands of companies to serve ads specifically to people who have walked into their physical stores in order to get them to come back. So, a little bit of good news. The Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals has overturned a Superior Court conviction of a man who was located by police using a cell site simulator or Stingray system. The court ruled that the defendant's Fourth Amendment rights were violated when law enforcement tracked down the suspect using his own cell phone without a warrant. Now, Stingrays work by pretending to be a cell tower. And once they're brought close enough to a particular phone, the phone pings a signal off of them. The Stingray then grabs onto that signal and allows whoever's using it to locate the phone in question. These sorts of devices are used by a number of different agencies, including FBI, ICE, the IRS, as well as police officers. But you have to have a warrant to use one. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Court ruled that the defendant's Fourth Amendment right.
Oh, hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you need to turn down your speaker.
Yeah, I just did that.
Okay.
Okay. I was calling about this CIA whistleblower Kevin Skip.
Yes.
With 2 P's, Skipp. And I didn't know if you've already talked about that.
No, we haven't.
It seems, he's quite, he gave a hour-long speech, and people can find it on YouTube. So that's CIA whistleblower Kevin Skip. And he's really, really lays it out about what the CIA is, and for starters, it's illegal. It's created outside the Constitution, and just needs to be gotten rid of.
Well, all the way back when the CIA was created, I think it was President Truman realized it was a danger. Because these intelligence agencies very quickly take on a life of their own, and by their very secretive nature, they're opaque to any kind of oversight. And certainly the CIA has become a major power within our government right now. And like I said, we know for a fact the head of the CIA just flat out lied to Donald Trump about Assad gassing those people at Idlib. And so they really are more harm than good, especially when you look at all the harm that has come to our country from this ongoing CIA-sanctioned drug smuggling into our country. It goes back at least to Vietnam, probably even before then.
Well, listening to him, we can see that we're completely hamstrung. One thing good that he does is clarify the difference between the shadow government and the deep state.
Okay, can you give us that difference in a nutshell?
Shadow government is above the deep state, controls the deep state. The deep state is kind of what we can see.
Okay.
Really, you gotta watch it. It's CIA whistleblower Kevin Skip, and no, I don't think I can do it for you in a nutshell.
All right.
But it's two different things. It's two different things: the shadow government and the deep state.
All right. Well, I'll definitely take a look for that on this next commercial break.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. All righty. Now, believe it or not, over in Europe, the European Commission paid 360,000 euros for a study on how piracy impacts the sales of copyrighted music, books, video games, and movies. And the EU kept the report under wraps because the report concluded there's no evidence that piracy is a major problem. Now, obviously, I'm not in favor of content piracy, but I think pirates get the blame for declining sales when the real fault lies with studio management that is making bad choices in terms of what movies to make. Certainly the pandering to the liberal agenda in this country, endless remakes. Apparently they just remade Flatliners again. And I have no intention of seeing the new one because I saw the old one. But anytime a studio executive makes a bad move and a film loses money, oh, it's the content pirates. We would have been great, but those gosh darn content pirates. But the EU found, no, the content pirates are at best a minor annoyance. And they're being unfairly scapegoated for the entertainment industry's own failings. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And already the corporate media is out there talking about the Kurdistan as if it's a done deal, that the referendum means that Kurdistan will break free. And like I said, it reveals the hypocrisy of the U.S. government, which is fully on board with Kurdistan having the right to break away from Iraq and form their own country. At the same time, they denounce the Crimean independence referendum, and said they would refuse to recognize it. All right, let's go to the phones here. Rob in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you. Speaking of this Kurdistan, these Kurds weren't even sure if they wanted to do this, but once they got pushed into it with all this U.S. and Israel backing it, pushing it forward, they're just going along with it. I mean, and basically it is a second Israel, and it's another land grab, resources, and so on. It's just all another canard.
Well,
course,
I think the Kurdish I think the Kurdish people have genuinely wanted their own state for a very long time, especially after some of the abuse that was dished out to them by both Iraq and Iran. So I would say that the United States and Israel took advantage of a pre-existing disposition among the Kurds and fanned it forward. But I don't think the Kurdish people were just all of a sudden happy to be living in Iraq one day, and then the next day, under U.S. and Israeli pressure, they said, we want our own country. I think the idea has been around for a very long time.
Well, this puts Iraq and Syria in a very big predicament.
Yes, it does.
Speaking of the iPhone, I don't know, the last few days, I don't know if one thing has to do with another, and I don't recall any updates or anything, but when I'm on Wi-Fi, even though I got all these bars, my radio app, and that's how I usually listen to you guys, is it's been buffering just forever and ever and ever, and then when I go and look, it says, I get that news feed, and it says your iPhone is offline. And I don't get what's going on with it, and it just buffers forever.
Well, it could be further up the chain because we know that this is a popular show, and a lot of people tune on into the streaming podcast.
It's not just RBN or whatever. It's for other networks I listen to off the same radio app. But it's just, for some reason, it's just saying, even though I know I'm online, I got the bars, it's saying your phone is offline. It's just weird. It's been like this for the last 4 or 5 days.
I would almost look at that particular radio app, and there's a number of them out there. If you could go in a browser to the RBN website and listen to the show on the native player that's at the website or at the Facebook page, and you can hear it fine there, then I would say probably the radio app. The radio app or its servers is the problem. Hello?
About 6, 7, 8 months, whatever. And for some reason last week, it wiped out all of my favorites. It wiped out everything, all my networks that I had on there, my favorites, my podcasts, everything. Just wiped it all out. And then the whole app has been acting glitchy ever since. I mean, one may have to do with the other, but it shouldn't have to do with saying my iPhone is offline. You know what I mean?
Well, that sounds to me like the app is an issue, or it may be the servers that support the app. Unfortunately, there's a tendency for people to launch a new app, and it's very successful, and they don't grow their server cluster to meet the demand, and then it starts slowing down. If it's storing all of your favorite networks on their server, and they've had a glitch there, then, yeah, it sounds to me like the app is the issue and not the iPhone.
Right. Well, catch these two latest stories here. Well, Facebook came out, and all of a sudden, a year later, all of a sudden they find these ads placed by Russia. And so now WAPO's out there within the hour. They put out a new post. Russia operatives use Facebook ads to exploit divisions over Black Lives Matters and Muslims. So they're continuing this. That's canard. They're like,
yeah, I mean, when it first came on out, Facebook said no, there were no ads that were from Russia, and then there was a meeting with high-level power players, and Facebook said, oh, you mean these ads over here? It's amazing we missed them before. So yeah, Facebook has sold to the deep state. Anyway, Rob, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got another phone call when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and apparently. Over in the Virgin Islands, the governor is requesting support. They're still without electricity on St. Croix. It's a mess over there. Now, the good news is Hurricane Marie is turning to the northeast. It's not going to come on shore on the continental U.S., and the one that's behind it, same thing, heading up into the North Atlantic, staying away from the U.S. We've had enough, frankly. All right, let's grab some phone calls. Rick in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, Yeah, Mike, Trump's on my mind.
Okay.
To me, it's not a surprise that he's hacking on the NFL because, they wouldn't let him be an owner. People don't have
I had forgotten about that.
No. He wanted to bring the Jersey Generals into the NFL, and Trump has that crowd around him that never writes anything off the book. And that crowd around Trump's got big, major buco money, and they were moving around all over the country back in those days.
Yes.
Buying the shuttle. All that money that Trump had is very suspicious. And so, since they wouldn't let him be in the NFL, I would tend to believe that this has something to do with that. And then, if he busts out the NFL, the ratings go down, the stadiums empty out, somebody sells the team, and somebody else ends up with the team. Very clever.
Yeah.
Almost on the level of racketeering.
Yeah, you're right. It almost does seem like that, and I'd completely forgotten about that whole story there.
Sure. Yeah, it ain't over till it's over, till the fat lady sings. Thanks for taking my call.
All right, you got it. We're going to switch over to Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. First, I wondered. I've been watching. I was looking at the news network. So I'm wondering what what's the sentence for Anthony Weiner? Have you heard anything about what they're going to give Weiner a sentence?
Yeah, 21 months.
You got 21 months. Okay, I looked at CNN for like 20 minutes, and they wouldn't show us. The Communist News Network. They don't like talking about it too much. But yeah, Michael, what's on my mind is what's going on with the NFL and the Black Lives Matter and all this crap. Michael, what would these blacks be doing if they didn't have football to play and get $1 million contracts and living in these white neighborhoods and these $1 million mansions? What would they be doing?
Basketball.
I think the NFL's been pretty good for them, and Kaepernick will never get another job as a quarterback. I mean, the guy's an idiot. And yeah, Michael, these blacks are complaining left and right about this and that but listen, Michael, you know what the narrative is? Why isn't anybody talking in the junior high schools, elementary schools, and high schools about it was the blacks selling blacks in Africa as slaves? It wasn't the white man saying, "Come on, get on this boat, you're gonna go pick cotton." They didn't go over there with shotguns and machetes and all that. They get your butts on these boats. You're going over to America and pick cotton. No, it was blacks selling the blacks for rum, and they still have slavery in Africa to this day, Michael. You know it.
Yes.
There's slavery in Africa to this moment. Look at us slaughter white South Africans. Matter of fact, Donald Trump should take all the white South Africans out of there. Either take them to Australia or bring them to the United States because they're going to all get slaughtered. Okay? They don't get those whites out of there in the next couple of years. There won't be no whites over there, Michael. That's what's going to happen here, I think. And as far as the slave trade, and we know, look, you remember Arsenio Hall, Michael, don't you?
Yes.
Do you remember what happened to him while he got kicked off the air? He was #1 rated show in America at the time.
I forget the exact circumstances. I remember that he vanished from the media almost as fast as Dave Chappelle did.
Well, I'm going to tell you why he was taken off the air, Michael. It happened in one day. Because he brought Louis Farrakhan on his show that night, and I was with my black boss at the time, and my boss even said to me, and we looked at each other, and you know what he said? He's out of there. You'll never hear from Arsenio again, because he had Farrakhan on the show that night, and then Louis Farrakhan was talking about how the Jews and the Rothschilds were buying the slave ships to bring the slaves of Africa over to America. In Portugal. Yes. Matter of fact, Michael, most of the slaves went to Brazil. They didn't come. The Portuguese are the biggest slave traders, and most of the slaves went to Brazil. They didn't come to America, United States.
Yes.
They went to Brazil and South America. I don't know. They never talk about that. None of the kids know about that. None of the black kids, all these African American little kids, know about it was their own people selling their own people for slaves, for rum, barrels of rum, and whatever jewels the chieftain could get in his village. You never hear, all you hear about, the white man this, the white man that. For God's sake, Michael, there's 758,000 white males killed each other in the Civil War, and it actually really wasn't about slavery. That was a second thought. And all you hear from the lying left media is about white man this, white man that. These people have it in, and I don't know who these white trash are, but they should be held accountable, like Trump said. These people are fake news. They're all a bunch of hypocrites, and what they're doing is having these blacks get outraged. And actually, look at a murder rate in Chicago over the weekend, Michael. You saw that?
Yeah, I saw that. And also, one of the articles that we have on what really happened today is, again, there's been another study of the actual facts that have found that blacks are not disproportionately abused by white police officers. In fact, white police officers right now are scared to be seen or videoed being abusive to a black suspect. So it's actually white people are getting beaten up and assaulted by the police more than the blacks right now. But right now it feels like,
Michael, you are correct.
It feels like we're heading into another Zimbabwe where they demonize all the white people, and then they basically dispossess the white people of all the factories and the farms and everything, hand them over to blacks as property redistribution, and then they run them into the ground because they don't really know how to make that stuff work. And I think we're heading into the same situation here. The only difference, of course, is that the United States is not an apartheid society. We haven't been since the end of the Civil War, and we got rid of segregation back in the 1950s. And so it's a very different situation. But it does concern me that it does seem like it's open season on white people, that we're just being demonized constantly. And again, I think it's intentional to get blacks and whites hating each other so they can't unite against the common enemy. And it's a replay of exactly what COINTELPRO was doing back in the 1960s, to get the whites and blacks fighting with each other so they couldn't unite together in opposition to the war in Vietnam.
Well, you're right, Michael. One more thing, Michael. Could you imagine if 50% of the NFL fans were to boycott the constituents that go to NFL games? Can you imagine 50% of the white fans of the NFL would say, I ain't going to watch them when it's football. It's all a bunch of pansy football anyway compared to what it was in the 70s when they actually had broken arms and broken legs and they still play in the game and give them an injection and go back to the game. These guys are making multi-millions of dollars. Can you imagine there would be no NFL left? It'd be gone. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave one more fact with your audience, Michael. If you look at the city of Detroit, in 1954 is the richest city in the United States. What happened when the blacks took over the city of Detroit, Michael? Tell the truth about that. The city of Detroit.
I don't.
My father was born in Detroit.
I don't know that it's necessarily an issue of the blacks, but that's when the Democrats took over. In fact, if you look at any of these major cities that are under Democratic leadership, and they've got extreme poverty, they've got extreme violence, they've got all these gun control laws that don't seem to really work. It's not a question of which race is in charge, but which party is in charge.
Correct. You're right. I thank you for that. But listen, Michael, another thing is, can you imagine in World War II if we didn't have the city of Detroit, what would have happened? Manufacturing?
Well, they were one of the major manufacturers, but we had manufacturing all over the country.
Well, I know that, but I believe if we didn't have Detroit in 1941, the United States, the war probably lasts another 2-3 years against Germany. I'm sure it's going to last a couple more years longer. Without Detroit, the United States would have had been in a precarious situation to beat the Germans in that time frame.
Okay, sure. All right, but again, our automobile truck manufacturing, Detroit was a heavy player, but they were by no means the only one. And there were other cities like up in Michigan.
LA
where
and all,
yeah, okay. All right, Tom, we're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Derek in Jacksonville. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir. I was wondering if you could give me some legitimate site to find out about the Gulf of Tonkin and how it was a false flag.
Well, it wasn't really
and also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say it wasn't really a false flag. It started out as an honest mistake. The USS Maddox had been tooling around the Gulf of Tonkin, and there'd been an earlier attack by the North Vietnamese patrol boats that were very agile and very maneuverable, and the Maddox was not able to hit them. And the patrol boats fired a couple of torpedoes at the Maddox, but they fired them from too far away, and they literally ran out of fuel and didn't hit anything. So then a couple of days later, and everybody's nerves are on edge, the Maddox is back in the Gulf of Tonkin, and an inexperienced sonar operator heard the Maddox's own propellers and said, oh, we're under torpedo attack again. And it went up the chain of command, and the commander of the Maddox immediately sent a correction saying, novice sonar operator. But President Johnson got that first report, threw the second one away, went before Congress and said North Vietnam has attacked us, and basically started cranking up the Vietnam War for real.
Okay, because I kind of sort of heard it was based on a lie, and if that was based on a lie, then there's 55,000 plus Americans died, 3 million Vietnamese. And I was just wanting to know if you had a site that I could go visit, kind of recap all
Well, not off the top of my head, but you can do a search, and I would definitely recommend that you not use Google because that is now so heavily filtered toward the government's version of things. I would go Yandex or DuckDuckGo and use those. I'm not using Google anymore. My wife is not using Google anymore. It's really gotten to the point where it's a search engine for the official story about everything, and you're not going to find.
Right. Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, sir. I've been trying to Google black cop kills black man, like say on Google and some other sites. I can't find it. I mean, maybe you can find it, but I just think that's a little peculiar that no black cop has shot a black man. Like maybe it's a few pages deep, but every time I research black cop kills black man, all you get is the current story.
Yeah, you won't get what you're looking for until 4 or 5 pages in. That's the way the new Google algorithm works. Is the official version of everything gets the top position in all the searches, and you have to go down way many pages before you get any alternative views, even if you get them at all. At this point, Google is a total waste of time. So I would go with Yandex or DuckDuckGo. Okay?
Yes, sir. I don't have a problem with these guys taking a kneel, but I wish they would take a kneel for, like, say, 9/11 Truth. They would want to go for talking, what they still alive, take a kneel for all the people who died for that.
Okay, your phone line is breaking up. I don't know why.
Okay.
Try and put your mouth a little closer to the microphone and repeat what you just said.
I said I don't mind if these guys take a kneel, the NFL guys, but how about taking a kneel for, let's say, if the Gulf of Tonkin was based on a lie and 55,000 plus people died, Americans died, or take a kneel for 9/11 Truth.
Well, it would be nice. It almost feels like it's orchestrated because too many of these players are getting involved with this. And by the way, never mind the U.S. code about how you're supposed to behave around the flag and the national anthem. It's actually in the NFL's own rules that when the national anthem is playing, you stand on the sideline and you face the flag and you show respect. So I'm waiting for one of these NFL owners to stand up and say, you're violating NFL rules. We're docking your pay for about $20,000 per offense.
Well, I'm from Jacksonville, and he, the owner there, it looks like he's standing arm in arm with him.
Yeah, it's starting to feel orchestrated. It's happened too fast and too much. And maybe the NFL players think this is trendy and cool and hip. But again, the TV ratings for the NFL are plunging. People are tearing up their tickets. They're burning their sports memorabilia. This is going to come back and cost the NFL a huge amount of money. In fact, it could drive the NFL out of business because they're contractually committed to those huge salaries for those players. And the owners are going to have to make up that shortfall out of their own pocket. So we could see this really backflash rather badly on the NFL. Anyway, Derek, we're going to let you go, and we're going to take Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I called in about the monetary system because there's a guy, I think I mentioned it before, David Merrill. Yeah, he was a law student at George Washington University in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
And he legal action against federalists regarding the Saving to Suitors Act of 1718, which I think was part of the Judiciary Act, 1788. Anyway, it was about forcing disclosure on the fact that even though we have a foreign private corporate fiat currency circulation, it is redeemable.
Okay, we're having problems hearing your phone connection. You need to put your mouth right up against that microphone. And if I understood you correctly, I think it's a little better. If I understand you correctly, no, in point of fact, a modern paper Federal Reserve note is not redeemable in silver. That went out in the 60s.
Well, this was a 1978 U.S. Supreme Court decision, and they said, yes, they are to be redeemed at any Federal Reserve branch or Federal Reserve System bank, because the people who are in possession of FRNs are actually creditors of the monetary system. And it's even codified in Title 12 of the United. I don't have the exact citation, but I can call you back with that. But
well,
you can look at it, Mike.
Email it to me. If you could email it to me. We're coming up on a commercial break here anyway, and so I'm going to have to let you go. But yeah, if you would find that actual site and email it to me. Again, the old silver certificates were redeemable in silver because the silver was the money. And then following Kennedy's assassination, they took the silver out of the coinage, and at the same time, that part about being able to redeem the note at the bank for lawful money was taken off the Federal Reserve note, with the implication that that piece of ink and paper is the lawful money, and it isn't. It's just a piece of paper with ink all over it. So, to the best of my knowledge, and if you can find the site and send it to me, I would love to see it. But my understanding is you can't go into a bank with a Federal Reserve note and get a dollar's worth of silver coins. They're not even in circulation anymore. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, last segment of our program today. So let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. As you know, on the last day of summer, California was hit by snow and hail, snow on the Sierra Nevadas. They actually had to get the snowplows out at Mammoth Lakes. Over in Yosemite National Park, they had to temporarily close Tioga Pass Road. That's the road that goes out of Yosemite to the east. Normally, it doesn't have to be closed until mid-November. And so it's an early winter, sign of a hard winter that's going to be coming on. One of the articles we posted up at whatreallyhappened.com is a collection of photos of snow in the Arab countries. Snow does fall on the Middle East, not everywhere and not consistently, but it does happen. Apparently, early season snow is closing roads in northern Utah as of yesterday. So it's getting on out there. Now, as you know, the liberals have really been on board this climate alarmism, and they have actually paid dearly for it. Every time that they lose, they double down on the green bet. Carbon taxes, human-caused global warming. And Hillary Clinton has now actually admitted that her attack on coal mining jobs was probably a mistake on her campaign. It's nice that she's actually starting to admit she made mistakes and that it wasn't all the fault of the Russians that she lost here. It's a very alarming story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Actually, the Washington Times is reporting climate alarmists are calling for those who do not buy into man-made global warming to be jailed and charged with murder, in that our delaying of the carbon tax and the carbon credit will lead to people's deaths from unrestrained global warming, and therefore it's sort of a pre-murder and we should be treated as such. I don't think so. Now, earlier in the program, I was talking about all these quakes that are going on all over, and I just got a notification of another one that happened just a little while ago. Let me go on back and get that one here. And it does look like the Earth is rocking and rolling. Papua New Guinea, magnitude 6.0, happened just a little while ago. And apparently over in Washington State, Mount Rainier is having a swarm of earthquakes. Now, Mount Rainier, it's majestic, it's beautiful. Claire and I used to visit there all the time when we lived in Washington State. It is still an active volcano, and it could go the same way that Mount St. Helens did. And, of course, over toward Southern California, 3 large earthquakes and a major volcanic eruption in Mexico sparked fears that the big one could hit California soon. And don't forget, we had that other moderate quake up on the Cascadia Fault, and that's part of a larger swarm there as well. And that Cascadia Fault is under much greater stress than the San Andreas itself. So that could really let go, and it would cause a lot of damage when they do. Finally, Cool Tech Gadget, it's called Xylea. They're crowdfunding right now to make this unit. It is a single microphone with multiple diaphragms on it that allows you to record and then separate out all the independent sounds in software. It sounds really cool. If it works as advertised, I definitely want to get one for Claire. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard Show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. And please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.